I was standing there in the middle of Hartsfield, Jackson Atlanta International Airport, with my scuffed little rolling suitcase in my hands and the tickets to Miami that I had bought myself tucked into the pocket of my shirt. For months, I had stretched every dollar of my pension for this family trip. It was money I saved by trimming the grocery list, skipping new clothes, cutting down on medicine refills. All I wanted was to see my daughter Denise happy, to see my granddaughter Maya playing in the sand, to feel that I still belonged to that family. But what happened that day broke me in a way I never imagined a person could be broken. Denise was elegant as always, in that tailored suit with a designer purse hanging off her shoulder. Marcus, my son-in-law, checked his phone with the face of a man forever too busy for the world. And Maya, my 16-year-old granddaughter, was glued to her screen, taking pictures for social media. When I shuffled up to them in the line at the counter, dragging my old suitcase, Denise looked at me with an expression I knew too well, contempt mixed with irritation. She sighed, that dramatic sigh she does right before she's about to say something cruel. And then the words came out like a lightning bolt that hit me square. In front of dozens of people, she told me I was just in the way, that old folks shouldn't travel, that I would ruin their vacation with my limitations and complaints. She said I was too slow, that I'd make a fool of myself, that they couldn't enjoy anything with me along. People around us stopped to stare. I saw pity in some eyes, discomfort in others. Maya lowered her head but said nothing in my defense. Marcus simply nodded, as if my daughter were stating the most obvious truth in the world. Something in me cracked in that instant. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was a cold, sharp clarity like ice. I looked at the tickets in my hand, the tickets I bought with the money I saved for months, denying myself even the small pleasures so I could give them this gift. Then, very slowly, in front of everyone, I tore the 4 tickets in half. The sound of paper ripping echoed through that crowded terminal. Denise went pale. Marcus took a step toward me, but I raised my hand and he stopped. I grabbed my suitcase, turned my back on them, and started walking toward the exit. I heard Denise shout my name. I heard the panic in her voice when she realized the tickets were in my name, and without those papers they weren't boarding anything. But I didn't stop, didn't look back, and as I left that airport, a certainty took hold of me with a force I'd never felt before. What they didn't know was that everything was about to change. My name is Walter James Carter. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the man everybody expected me to be. The dutiful husband who cared for his wife for 40 years until diabetes took her away. The devoted father who sacrificed his own dreams so his daughter could study business at a private university. The convenient grandfather who was always available when they needed me to watch Maya, or clean their house, or cook for important guests. But that day in Atlanta, something changed forever. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending their cruel words didn't hurt. Maybe it was the rage piled up over years of being treated like an old piece of furniture tolerated out of pity. Or maybe my old man's heart simply couldn't carry another humiliation without shattering completely. Denise had always been ambitious. Since she was little, she wanted the best things, the best clothes, the best toys, the best education. And I, like any father who loves his child, worked more than one job to give her everything she asked for. I cleaned office buildings at dawn, sold hot plates out of a church kitchen during the day, and did odd repair work at night. My hands turned rough, my back bent, my youth drained away in those years of constant effort. But watching Denise graduate from college was the greatest reward of my life. When she married Marcus, a lawyer from a comfortable family, I thought my sacrifices had been worth it. My daughter had gotten the life I never could have, a big house in a nice neighborhood, a successful husband, the possibility of not working and dedicating herself to being a full-time mother. I felt proud to have been part of that climb. I sold the few valuables I had, including my wedding ring, the most precious thing I owned, to help them with the down payment on their house, money that represented all my savings from a lifetime of work. The first years after their wedding were good. Denise visited me often. She brought Maya to spend weekends with me. She included me in family celebrations. I felt needed, valued, an important part of their lives. But things began to change gradually, so slowly that at first I didn't notice. First, the visit spaced out. "I'm very busy with the baby, Dad," Denise would say when Maya was little. Then the calls grew shorter, colder. "I don't have time to chat, Dad. I've got 1,000 things to do." Then came the celebrations where I became the one in charge of the kitchen, not the guest of honor. "Dad, you cook so well. Why don't you make the greens and cornbread for Christmas dinner?" When my wife, Laverne, died 5 years ago, I thought Denise would draw closer. I thought she'd understand that I was alone now, that I needed more of her company and affection. But the opposite happened. My widowhood seemed to make her uncomfortable, as if my sadness were an extra burden she didn't want to carry. The visits grew even scarcer after that. Maya, my sweet girl who'd once been so affectionate, started to change too. She turned into a teenager embarrassed by her old-fashioned granddad. When she came to visit, she'd lock herself in the guest room with her phone. She barely spoke to me. If I asked about school or her friends, I got one-word answers. Like talking to me was a chore she had to tick off a list. Marcus had always been distant, but as the years passed, his attitude turned openly contemptuous. He treated me like some doddering relic who didn't understand the modern world. If I offered an opinion, he cut me down with slick little jokes about the good old days, or how the world had changed and I was too slow to keep up. Denise never corrected him, but she didn't defend me either. She stayed quiet, eyes on her phone, as if her husband insulting her father was something normal that had to be tolerated. The last couple of years were especially hard. I realized I was useful only for certain very specific things. Watch Maya when they traveled, clean their house when they had important guests, cook for their social gatherings. I was like unpaid help, expected to be grateful for being included at all. Every time they needed something, the phone rang. "Dad, can you come watch Maya this weekend?" "Dad, can you make your famous ribs for Saturday's dinner?" "Dad, can you come tidy up the house before Marcus's partners visit?" And I always said yes. I always dropped my own plans, my own needs, to please my daughter, because deep down I was afraid. Afraid that if I wasn't useful, I wouldn't have a place in their lives. Afraid of being completely alone in the world. Afraid of dying and no one noticing. But the more useful I tried to be, the less they valued me. The harder I worked to please them, the more they took me for granted. My unconditional love turned into a license for them to mistreat me without consequence. And without even realizing it, I had taught my own family they could step on me because I'd always be there, enduring, forgiving, justifying their cruelty with my desperate need to belong. The trip to Miami had been my idea. After months of feeling more and more invisible in my own family, I thought a vacation together would help us reconnect, to remember we were a family and that we loved each other. I spent 6 months of savings on those tickets, full of hope. Denise relaxed on a warm beach, Maya giggling as she kicked at the shoreline, me feeling like I still had a place in their hearts. When I proposed the trip, Denise made a face like the idea bothered her. "Are you sure, Dad? Miami's tiring, heat, walking, all that." I insisted I wouldn't be a burden, that I just wanted to be with them. They agreed at last, but now I see they only did because the tickets were already paid, and they didn't want to lose a free vacation. In the weeks before the trip, I could feel Denise tense up whenever we talked about plans. Marcus made sarcastic comments about traveling with in-laws that Denise never contradicted, but never disapproved of either. Maya complained it would be super boring doing only the things her granddad could do. I clung to my hope anyway, thinking once we were at the beach everything would be different. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I packed my suitcase with such care, my best summer shirts, the sun hat I bought just for the occasion, comfortable sandals for walking on the sand. I tucked a little extra cash into my wallet to treat them to good meals, to buy Maya a keepsake, to feel like I could contribute to making the trip perfect. We got to the airport early that morning. Denise and Marcus were tense, whispering to each other while I made sure all our documents were in order. Maya was more interested in taking selfies than chatting with me, but I kept smiling, kept pretending not to notice the chill, kept hoping things would warm up once we reached Florida. And then came the moment that changed everything. We were inching forward in the line when Denise got a call. It was her friend Tanya, apparently having trouble with her husband and needing to get out of town. Denise spoke for several minutes, and I caught scraps of the conversation. Tanya crying, saying she needed to leave, saying she had nowhere to go. When Denise hung up, she looked at me with that expression I now recognize as the prelude to something terrible. "Dad, we have a problem," she said. "Tanya needs to get out of the city urgently. Her husband's treating her really badly. She needs a place to stay for a few days." "She can stay at my place," I said immediately. "I'll give her the keys. She can use my room." "No problem." Denise shook her head. "No, Dad. She needs to be far away, not just across town. I was thinking maybe we could give her our spot on the trip." I didn't understand at first. "Our spot? Whose spot?" "Well, your spot, Dad. Tanya could come with us instead of you. It's only 3 days. You can stay home and rest. At your age, the trip will tire you anyway." Time stopped. People kept moving around us. Announcements kept chirping from the speakers. Life continued as normal for everyone except me, because in that moment I realized that to my own daughter, my presence on a family trip I paid for was so irrelevant I could be swapped out like luggage, and it wouldn't matter. "But Denise," I murmured, "this is our family trip. It's my gift to you. I've been preparing for weeks." "Dad, don't be selfish," she said in that scolding voice she uses like I'm still a child. "Tanya's in a real crisis. We can travel together anytime. This is more important." Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. Selfish for wanting time with my family? Marcus stepped in then, wearing that fake smile he uses when he's about to sell me something. "Walter, you've got to understand. Denise and Tanya go way back. They're like sisters, and you've always been understanding. We know you'll get it." Then Denise added, "Honestly, it's better this way. You're not used to traveling so much. Airports, hotels, different food. It'll stress you out. Best to stay home and tend your plants." There it was again, that infantilizing tone, treating me as if age had turned me into some fragile fool who couldn't handle the world, as if 68 years of living had left me mentally unfit for life's complexities. Maya came over then, holding what was now my ticket changed into Tanya's name. "Thanks for understanding, Grandpa. I really appreciate that you made this happen for Tanya. She needs it." That was the instant something in me finally, irrevocably broke. Not because they'd changed my ticket for someone else, not because they had decided to exclude me from the trip I had paid for. It broke because they hadn't even asked me. They decided for me. They talked among themselves and rearranged my life without consulting me, like I was an object to be moved wherever was convenient. "Walter," Denise said, using my full name like I was a child who'd done something wrong. "Don't make that face. We'll do something special when we get back. I promise." Another empty promise, like all the others. Dinners that got canceled, visits postponed, calls that never came. Her word held no value anymore, and she didn't even know it. The loudspeaker announced the first boarding call for our flight. My flight. The trip I'd dreamed about for weeks. Denise took Maya by the arm. "Come on. We need to check in." She glanced back at me one last time. "Walter, grab a cab home, and remember to water the balcony plants, please." I stood there like a fool, holding my suitcase, watching them head to the security line. Denise didn't look back once. Marcus walked with that swagger so many people admired, arm in arm with Maya, chatting like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just shattered the heart of a 68-year-old man in the middle of a crowded airport. I stayed frozen, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. People streamed by with their luggage, hugging loved ones, living normal lives, while mine came apart. A tear rolled down my cheek, then another and another. 40 years of marriage had taught me never to cry in public, to keep my composure, to be the perfect husband, the perfect father, the man who never caused trouble. And there I was, crying like a lost child in the busiest airport in the country. In that absolute pain, something began to change inside me. A small flame I'd let sleep for years started to flicker. It wasn't anger yet. It wasn't revenge. It was something deeper and more dangerous. It was the understanding that I'd spent my whole life shrinking so others could feel big. That I taught my family not to value me by not valuing myself. That I'd been complicit in my own invisibility by swallowing every humiliation and every slight without protest. And that was the same hour, minutes later, when I looked at those tickets I bought with my pension, lifted my hands, and tore them down the middle. The sound cracked through the terminal. Denise blanched. Marcus halted, but I kept moving, and as I walked out beneath that wide Atlanta sky, another man walked with me, one who had finally remembered his worth. I went back home alone that day, and the silence in my small apartment had never sounded so loud. I sat down in the old recliner that used to belong to my late wife, Laverne, and let the tears run freely for the first time in years. I didn't cry because of the humiliation at the airport. I cried for all the times I had swallowed my pain in silence. I cried for every thank you, Daddy, that was really a demand in disguise, for every birthday I spent waiting for a call that never came, for every moment I was made to feel like a burden in the lives of people I loved most. I remember the nights when Denise was a little girl, coughing through pneumonia. I spent hours sitting beside her bed, changing cold towels on her forehead, praying she'd make it through. I remembered working 3 jobs when Laverne lost hers, just so Denise could keep attending that private school she loved so much. I remembered selling my old wedding ring to help with her down payment, the one token of my marriage that I had kept all those years. I never complained. I thought that's what a father was supposed to do. Give without expecting anything back. Sacrifice quietly. Make his child's dreams come true, even if it meant letting his own fade away. My sister, Florence, used to tell me I was too generous, that Denise was growing up spoiled, used to getting everything without effort. Walt, she'd say, shaking her head, that girl needs to learn that life costs something. If you keep handing her everything, she's never going to value you, or anything else. I thought she was being harsh. I told myself she was just bitter because her own son, Ronnie, couldn't keep a steady job and was always borrowing money. I felt proud that my daughter was so driven, so polished, so different from the struggles we grew up with. Now, sitting there in my dark apartment, I realized Florence had been right. By giving Denise everything without asking anything in return, I had taught her to take without gratitude. I had shown her that my love was endless, unconditional, and therefore, in her eyes, worthless. When something costs nothing, it's easy to throw it away. The days after the airport were torture. Denise called me several times from Miami, not to apologize, but to tell me how great the trip was going. Dad, you should see this sunset, she said one night over the phone, her voice bright with excitement. It's incredible. Tanya's feeling so much better. This trip was exactly what she needed. Not once did she mention that I was supposed to be there. Not once did she acknowledge the way she'd hurt me. It was like she had completely erased from her mind that I was the one who bought those tickets, that it was my idea, my gift, my dream for us to be together. Marcus called once, and his call was even worse. Walter, he said in that measured, patronizing tone of his, I just wanted to thank you for being so understanding. Denise is finally relaxed. Maya's having a great time. Honestly, it would have been too much for you. Lots of stairs at the hotel. Lots of walking on the beach. The sun's brutal. It's really for the best that you stayed home. He talked as if I had made the decision myself, as if I were too senile to notice what had really happened. Maya sent a few photos by text, smiling at the beach, lounging by the pool, eating in fancy restaurants. In every picture she looked happy, unbothered, as if her grandfather's absence meant nothing at all. I waited foolishly for a message saying, "Wish you were here," or even, "We miss you, Grandpa." But no message came. My place in their world was gone, and the worst part was, they didn't even seem to notice. On the 3rd day of their trip, my neighbor Mrs. Harris came by. She's 72 and lost her husband 3 years ago, so she understands what it means to be an older person alone. She brought sweet tea and cornbread, her way of saying she cared. We sat at my kitchen table, and without me saying a word, she seemed to know what had happened. "I saw you coming back from the airport that day," she said softly. "You looked heartbroken." Then I saw Denise and Marcus leaving in their car, laughing like nothing was wrong. Mrs. Harris has that special kind of wisdom older women get, the kind that sees things as they are, without sugarcoating. "Can I ask you something, Walt?" she said after a sip of tea. "When's the last time Denise did something for you without you asking her?" The question hit me like a hammer. I sat there trying to think. I searched my memory for one instance, just one, where my daughter had done something kind for me out of love, not obligation, not because she wanted something. A spontaneous visit, a gift, a phone call just to check on me. I couldn't think of a single one. You can't, can you? Mrs. Harris said gently. That's because to her, you're like running water. Always there when she turns the tap, always giving, and she never once thinks about what happens if one day the water just stops coming. Her words cut deep because they were true. I had become invisible, not because I was old, but because I'd made myself endlessly available. They only noticed my absence when they needed me. Then Mrs. Harris told me her own story about her son Melvin. I was just like you, she said. Did everything for that boy. Paid his bills, cooked his meals, even helped him buy a car. I thought that was love. Then one day I realized I'd raised a man who thought the world owed him everything. I had to learn to say no, Walt, to draw a line. It was hard, hardest thing I ever did, but it was necessary. That night, after she left, I sat in the dim light of my living room thinking about her words. I started remembering all the little moments over the years when I'd felt something wasn't right, but brushed it aside. Like when Denise asked me to watch Maya for her honeymoon, and then a month later went on another vacation without even telling me. Or when Marcus borrowed $2,000 for an emergency and never paid it back, then acted surprised when I mentioned it. "Oh, I thought that was a gift," he'd said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Or when Denise had me clean her entire house before her in-laws came over, then didn't invite me to the dinner because, as she put it, "It's formal, Dad, and you might feel out of place." All those moments I'd explained away as misunderstandings, as normal family dynamics. They were nothing of the sort. They were a pattern, a system of taking advantage. My daughter had learned that she could ask anything of me, and I'd say yes. She'd learned she could speak to me however she wanted, and I'd forgive her. She'd learned that my love was unconditional and decided to exploit that fact. A few days later, another neighbor, Mrs. Cooper from downstairs, came up to visit. Mrs. Cooper is 75, a straight shooter who says what she thinks no matter how much it stings. "Walter," she said the moment she sat down, "I heard about that mess at the airport. And let me tell you, it's about damn time you realized how your daughter treats you." I stared at her, startled. Mrs. Cooper had always been friendly, but not nosy. Now she leaned in, her eyes sharp. "You know, I heard Denise on the phone one day, right outside this building. She was talking to a friend, saying she couldn't wait for you to pass, so she could sell your apartment and use the money to expand hers. She said, and I quote, 'When my dad's gone, that place will bring in at least 100 grand. Her words froze me. It felt like the air was sucked out of the room. My own daughter, waiting for me to die like one waits for a check to clear. She wasn't thinking about losing her father. She was thinking about gaining a property. Mrs. Cooper went on. "And that husband of hers? I've seen him checking your mailbox more than once, pretending he's just picking up a package. That man's up to something. You better be careful about what you sign or what information you give them." Her warning jolted a memory loose, something I had dismissed months earlier. Marcus had come by one afternoon with a folder full of papers, saying it was for financial organization. He told me it was just to make sure things were in order for the future. I'd signed several documents he put in front of me, trusting that as a lawyer, he knew what he was doing, and that he had my best interest at heart. Now I realized how naive that was. I might have signed away control of my own money, or even my home. That realization filled me with a cold rage I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. It might be legal, too. They hadn't only taken advantage of my love. They might have taken advantage of my trust, my property, my very livelihood. By the 5th day after the airport, Denise and Marcus returned from Miami. I waited foolishly, thinking they'd visit, maybe bring a souvenir, maybe at least act like they'd missed me. But they didn't come. Not that day. Not the next. It was as if I'd been erased completely. Finally, on the 3rd day after their return, Denise called, not to apologize, but to ask me to watch Maya that weekend. They had a wedding to attend in Savannah. "Dad," she said, Can you keep Maya Saturday and Sunday? You know we don't trust leaving her with the neighbors." The audacity of it left me speechless. After humiliating me at the airport, excluding me from a trip I paid for, and ignoring me for over a week, she had the nerve to ask for another favor, as if nothing had happened. I took a deep breath before answering. "Denise," I said calmly, "I think you should find someone else to watch Maya this weekend." There was a long silence on the line. She clearly hadn't expected that answer. "What do you mean, someone else?" "Dad, you're a grandfather. It's your responsibility to look after her when we can't." "My responsibility?" I repeated slowly. "And what's your responsibility toward me, Denise?" "Dad, what are you talking about? I've always been a good daughter." A good daughter replaces her father with a friend on a family trip he paid for? A good daughter humiliates him in public and then pretends nothing happened. She went quiet. When she finally spoke, her tone hardened. "Dad, don't be dramatic. What happened at the airport is over. Tanya needed that trip more than you did. You just wanted a vacation. I thought you'd be mature enough to understand sometimes we have to make sacrifices for others." Sacrifices for others. The irony nearly made me laugh. I'd been making sacrifices for others my entire life, and for her most of all. 3 jobs for her education, selling my ring for her house, years of unpaid labor as her babysitter and handyman. "Denise," I said quietly, "find someone else to watch Maya. I have plans this weekend." "What plans could you possibly have, Dad? You never go anywhere." And that question hurt more than all the insults. She was right. I didn't have plans. I didn't have a life outside their needs. I'd become a man without a center, existing only for their convenience. But that was about to change. "Well," I said, "I'm going to start going places now. And I'm starting this weekend." Before she could answer, I hung up the phone. It was the first time in my life I'd ever hung up on my daughter. The first time I'd ever told her no. It felt terrifying, and it felt like freedom. That night, after I hung up on Denise, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, my heart pounding. I'd never told her no before. For 68 years, I had been the kind of man who avoided confrontation, who believed peace was better than pride. But something inside me had shifted permanently at that airport, and hanging up that phone was the first real act of freedom I'd taken in decades. I sat for a long time thinking about what to do next. The apartment was filled with memories. Laverne's framed pictures on the walls, the scent of her old lavender perfume lingering faintly in the curtains. I could almost hear her voice whispering, "Walt, it's about time you stood up for yourself." She used to tell me that my heart was too soft, that people would take advantage of my kindness. She'd been right too. I smiled sadly, looked around her small living room, and whispered back, "You were right, baby. I'm done being a fool." Then, on a sudden impulse, I picked up the phone and called my cousin Rosa. She lived down in Charleston, South Carolina, and had been inviting me to visit for years. Every time she asked, I'd said no, because Denise might need me that weekend, because Maya might have a school event, because I thought my place was to stay close in case my family needed me. But now there was nothing tying me down. "Rosa," I said when she answered, her voice warm and bright as ever. "You still got that spare room?" "Walt," she cried, laughing. "You mean to tell me after all these years you're finally coming to see me?" "If the offer's still open," I said. "Of course it is. Come this weekend, cousin. We'll go to the market, walk by the harbor, talk like we used to. Lord, it'll be good to see you." So that Friday morning, I packed a small bag, put on my best linen shirt, and caught the early bus to Charleston. It was the first time in years I'd done something just for myself, without asking permission, without checking anyone's schedule. The ride was long, nearly 5 hours, but every mile felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The scenery rolled by, pine forests, little towns, gas stations, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like a man who belonged to himself again. That weekend with Rosa was like breathing fresh air after being buried underground. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade, but it was as if no time had passed. She met me at the station with her big smile and a hug, so tight it almost cracked my ribs. "Look at you, old man," she said, laughing. "Still handsome, still standing tall. Barely, I said, grinning. We spent the next 2 days catching up, walking through the historic district, eating shrimp and grits at a little cafe overlooking the water. Rosa had always been fiery, independent, and fearless. She'd raised 3 kids on her own after her husband left, and she'd never once complained. On Saturday night, we sat on her porch with glasses of sweet tea, listening to the crickets, and I told her everything about the airport, about the trip, about Denise and Marcus, and how it all had gone down. She didn't interrupt me once, just nodded with that knowing expression only older women seem to master. When I finished, she set her glass down and said, "Walter, you got to stop measuring your worth by how much you give to people who don't deserve it. You done raised your child. You did your part. Now it's your turn to live before it's too late." Her words hit deep. I'd spent so long thinking that being a good father meant endless giving, that love meant sacrifice without limits. But as I sat there under that Carolina moon, I realized I had been wrong. Love without respect isn't love, it's servitude. When I returned home Sunday night, my answering machine was blinking red with messages, 5 of them, all from Denise. Her voice grew angrier with each one. "Dad, I can't believe you just disappeared like that. You knew we had that wedding this weekend." Then another. "I had to cancel the trip because we couldn't find anyone else to stay with Maya. Marcus is furious. I hope you're happy." And then a third. "Dad, please, this rebellion of yours doesn't suit you. You're too old for tantrums." Tantrums. That word made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in weeks. Imagine that, a man reclaiming his dignity being called childish. I deleted the messages, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window as the city lights flickered outside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would stop living for Denise. I would stop bending myself into the shape of her convenience. I would live for me. The next morning, I called an old friend, Harold, a retired lawyer who'd worked with me years ago. "Harold," I said, "I need to review some papers. I think I might have signed things I shouldn't have." He agreed to see me that same afternoon. When I got to his office, he looked older but still sharp, his eyes as keen as ever. I told him everything, about Marcus bringing me papers to sign, about the conversations I'd had with my neighbors, about the unease that had been gnawing at me ever since. He frowned, flipping through his notes as I talked. "Walter," he said finally, "you may have given them power of attorney. It's a common trick when someone trusts family too much. But don't worry. If that's the case, we can revoke it. Everything can be set right." We spent the next 2 hours sorting through paperwork. Sure enough, Marcus had filed a power of attorney document in Denise's name, giving her control over my accounts in the event of incapacity. There was also a statement authorizing Marcus to manage property sales on my behalf. And worst of all, a declaration that I wanted my condo transferred to Denise, to avoid future legal inconvenience. My stomach turned reading my own signature under those words. "Were these signed in your home?" Harold asked. "Yes." Marcus said it was just to make things easier in case of emergencies. Harold sighed. "I've seen this before, my friend. They took advantage of your trust. But you're lucky. You're still competent, alert, and aware. We can fix this right now." By the time I left his office, we had revoked every single one of those documents. I opened a new bank account, transferred my savings, and changed my will. Half of my estate would now go to a local community center for senior citizens, the same one where Mrs. Harris volunteered, and the other half to a foundation that provided housing for elderly veterans. For the first time in my life, I was using my money for something that would make a difference, not to buy affection that never came, but to help people who needed it. Harold looked at me across his desk and smiled. "You know, Walt, not many folks your age have the courage to do what you're doing. Most just let their families walk all over them until it's too late." I nodded. Better late than never. The next few weeks were quiet, almost peaceful. I didn't call Denise, and she didn't call me. At least not at first. I began taking watercolor painting classes at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try. My first attempts were messy, clumsy, but every brushstroke, felt like a small act of reclaiming myself. I met other people my age, folks who, like me, were rediscovering who they were after years of living for others. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. "Denise." "Dad," she said in that clipped tone that tried to sound calm, but couldn't hide the irritation. "I need your help this Friday. Marcus is hosting an important dinner with his partners, and I need someone to clean the house before then. You know how particular he is." "I can't, Denise," I said evenly. "I have plans." There was a long pause. "What kind of plans?" "The kind that matter to me," I said. Her voice sharpened. "Dad, this is important. My husband's career. My plans are important too." I interrupted, my voice steady. For a moment, all I could hear was her breathing on the other end. Then she said, almost in disbelief, "What could possibly be more important than helping your own family?" That question told me everything. To her, my only role in life was service. I existed to clean, to babysit, to obey. "Hire a cleaning lady, Denise," I said. "You can afford it." And before she could say another word, I hung up. That night, I went to dinner with Mrs. Harris and Mrs. Cooper at a small soul food restaurant nearby. We talked for hours, laughing like schoolkids. When I got home, I realized I hadn't thought about Denise once the entire evening, and that realization felt like peace. The following week tested my newfound strength. Denise called again on Thursday morning, her voice dripping with that same mix of expectation and irritation that I'd known all my life. "Dad," she said, "Marcus and I need to go to New Orleans for a long weekend with some friends. Can you stay with Maya from Friday to Monday? She's 16, but I don't like leaving her alone." I took a deep breath before answering. "I can't, Denise. I'll be busy this weekend." "Busy?" she repeated, her tone almost mocking. "With what? You've got nothing going on, Dad. Be serious." "I'm serious," I said. "I'm going to Nashville with my reading group. We're visiting some bookstores, attending a poetry talk." For a few seconds, there was only silence on the line, and then she spoke in disbelief. "You're skipping time with your granddaughter for some old people book trip?" That stung, but it also clarified everything. To her, anything I did that wasn't for their benefit was meaningless. My hobbies, my interests, my joy, none of that had value if it didn't serve her. "Denise," I said calmly, "Maya's 16. She's smart, capable. If you don't want her home alone, hire someone. You and Marcus can afford it." "I can't believe how selfish you've become," she snapped. "What happened to you, Dad? You used to be so kind." There it was again, that word. Selfish. When I'd wanted to travel with them, I was selfish. When I'd refused to clean their house, I was selfish. Now that I had a weekend of my own, I was selfish. Every time I said no, that's what they called it. "Denise," I said quietly, "for 42 years, I've put your needs before mine. If I finally choose something for myself, that's not selfish. It's balance." "But we're family," she insisted. "Family comes first." "I am family too," I said, and before she could answer, I hung up. That Friday morning, I boarded the bus to Nashville with 7 other members of my reading circle, all women in their 60s and 70s, all full of life. We spent the trip talking about books, laughing, sharing stories about children who'd grown distant or ungrateful, about rediscovering ourselves after decades of service. For the first time in years, I felt understood. We arrived in Nashville that afternoon, and the city's energy filled me up like sunlight. We visited old bookstores, attended a lecture on Southern writers, and ate barbecue at a family-owned place that had been around for generations. Saturday night, we went to a poetry reading at a small theater. When one of the poets, a woman about my age, read a poem about reclaiming her life after raising children who forgot her, I felt something deep inside my chest loosen and breathe. During the whole weekend, I didn't think once about Denise or Marcus. I didn't worry about Maya or whether anyone needed me. For the first time in my adult life, I was living purely for myself. When I got home Monday afternoon, the red light on my answering machine blinked again. 8 messages this time. The first 5 were Denise, each angrier than the last. "Dad, I can't believe you did this again. I had to cancel our trip because Maya refused to stay with a stranger." Marcus lost money on the reservation. This attitude of yours is tearing the family apart. Dad, what's gotten into you? You're acting like a completely different person. The last 3 messages were from Marcus, and his tone was cold, threatening. Walter, he said in the first one, this defiance of yours has gone too far. Denise is upset, Maya's confused, and you're creating unnecessary tension. In the second, as a lawyer, I have to warn you that your recent behavior is concerning. The family is worried about your judgment. And in the last, if this continues, we might have to explore professional help for you. There are facilities that handle elderly individuals struggling with impulse control and confusion. It's for your own good. That last message sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't concern, it was intimidation. Marcus was threatening me, implying that they might try to declare me incompetent if I didn't fall back in line. That night, I called Harold, my lawyer friend, and told him everything. Walter, he said, his voice steady but serious. Start recording every message they leave you. Save everything. If they ever try to claim you're unstable, you'll have proof that they're the ones manipulating you. So I did. I bought a small recorder from the corner store and saved every voicemail, every message, every scrap of evidence. In the following weeks, the pressure from Denise and Marcus grew. They started showing up unannounced at my apartment, trying to talk. Denise would cry, saying she didn't recognize me anymore, that I'd turned cold. Marcus would speak slowly, in that patronizing tone that made my blood boil. Walter, he said one afternoon, we're just worried. People your age sometimes go through personality shifts. It's not your fault. I'm not going senile, I said firmly. I'm just done being your servant. He smiled that slick lawyer smile. You sound angry. That's another symptom, you know, mood changes, irritability. That was the moment I realized exactly what they were doing. They were building a case to have me declared mentally unfit. Once that happened, they could take control of my money, my property, everything. So I called Harold again, and he put me in touch with a licensed psychologist, Dr. Robert Hayes, who specialized in geriatric mental health. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with Dr. Hayes 3 times. He ran every test imaginable: memory, reasoning, emotional stability. At the end, he gave me a full written evaluation, declaring that I was mentally sound, rational, and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. I had it notarized and made 3 copies, one for Harold, one for my safety deposit box, and one for myself. It turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did, because 2 weeks later, Denise and Marcus showed up at my door with a stranger, a man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase. Dad, Denise said, her voice trembling in a rehearsed kind of way. This is Dr. Franklin. He's here just to check on you. We're worried. I smiled politely. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Dr. Franklin gave me that same patronizing smile Marcus always wore. Mr. Carter, your family says you've been acting out of character, refusing help, showing aggression, making impulsive decisions. I leaned back in my chair and looked him straight in the eye. Dr. Franklin, before you go any further, I need to let you know that I've already been evaluated by a licensed psychologist, Dr. Robert Hayes, from the Midtown Wellness Center. Here's his report, notarized and signed, confirming that I'm in full control of my mental faculties. The doctor blinked, clearly thrown off. I opened a folder on my table and slid out another sheet. And here, I said, are recordings of my son-in-law threatening to have me committed unless I hand over financial control. Marcus's face turned white. Denise froze. I stood up slowly. Now, unless you'd like me to call the police and my attorney right now, I suggest all 3 of you leave my home. Dad, Denise started, her voice cracking. No, I said. You've done enough. They left in silence, the door clicking shut behind them. I stood there shaking, not with fear, but with power. For the first time, I had protected myself instead of begging for understanding. That night, as I sat with a cup of tea, I realized the battle I had won wasn't against them. It was against a version of myself who had believed he didn't deserve better. The next morning, the phone didn't ring. The house was quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't dread that silence. I welcomed it. Over the next few weeks, I kept to my new routine, painting in the mornings, attending reading sessions in the afternoons, walking in the park near my apartment at sunset. Sometimes I felt lonely, yes, but it was a clean kind of loneliness, not the heavy ache of being surrounded by people who didn't care. I started to see that I hadn't lost my family. I had simply lost the illusion of one. The real thing, mutual love, respect, understanding, had never truly been there. And what I was building now, inside myself, was far stronger than anything they could give me. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful of my entire life. For the first time in years, I woke up without the dread of a phone call demanding something from me. The mornings were quiet, soft, almost sacred. I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching the light spill over the city roofs, really feeling, the warmth of the sun. My little apartment, which used to feel like a cage, began to feel like a sanctuary. I rearranged the furniture, got rid of the clutter, and filled the place with plants and small paintings from the community center art fairs. I even adopted an old stray cat from a nearby shelter, a grumpy orange tabby I named Duke. He reminded me of myself, scarred, quiet, and learning how to trust again. Every morning, Duke would curl up beside me while I painted. My hands weren't as steady as they once were, but I didn't care about perfection. I painted memories, Laverne's smile as she danced barefoot in the kitchen, the little house we lived in when Denise was a baby, the church picnics, the summer sunsets. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming pieces of a life I'd allowed others to erase. At the community center, people started noticing the change in me. Mrs. Harris said I seemed lighter, almost younger. "You've got your spark back, Walt," she told me one afternoon while we painted side by side. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I smiled and said, "I stopped living for people who never saw me." Word about what happened with my daughter spread quietly among the regulars. Not the cruel gossip kind, more like quiet respect. A few other folks confided their own stories of children who had turned cold or manipulative. I realized how common it was. How many parents my age were suffering silently, too afraid to speak out for fear of losing their families. One man, Arthur, told me his son had cleaned out his bank account by mistake and never paid him back. A woman named Ruth confessed her daughter only visited when she needed money. Their stories echoed mine, so closely it felt eerie. It made me realize how deep this quiet epidemic of neglect ran. Parents forgotten by the same children they had once sacrificed everything for. It was Mrs. Harris who gave me the idea that would change everything. "You know, Walt," she said one afternoon, "you've got a way with words. The way you tell your story, it moves people. You should write it down. Not for revenge, but for truth." I thought about that all night. Writing. I hadn't written anything in years, not since my wife's passing. But the idea took root. Maybe it was time to put everything down, not to dwell on the pain, but to make sense of it. So I started writing. At first, it was just fragments, memories, pieces of conversations, feelings I didn't know how to express. Then the pages began to connect, forming a narrative. I wrote about the airport, about tearing those tickets, about the long years of quiet servitude that had led to that moment. The words flowed out of me like water breaking through a dam. I called the piece "The Day I Tore the Tickets." Writing became a ritual. I'd wake up early, make a pot of coffee, sit at my small desk, and write until noon. Duke would sit by the window, tail flicking lazily, as if supervising the process. Some days, the writing hurt. Reliving those humiliations, those betrayals, felt like reopening old wounds. But other days, it felt healing, like cleaning those wounds properly for the first time. After a few weeks, I showed the draft to Mrs. Harris and Ruth. They read it in silence, then looked up at me with tears in their eyes. "Walt," Ruth said softly, "people need to read this. It's not just your story, it's ours too." At first, I didn't think much of it. I printed a few copies and left them at the community center library, thinking maybe a few people would read them. But within a week, the center director called me. "Walter," she said, "we need more copies. People are lining up to read your story." Apparently, the day I tore the ticket struck a chord. Seniors came up to me after classes, shaking my hand, thanking me for saying the things they'd been too afraid to say. One woman, Evelyn, said, "You put into words the pain I've carried for years. My daughter treats me just like that. But reading your story gave me courage to finally stand up for myself." Those words hit me harder than any applause could have. My pain, once something I'd thought was useless, was helping others heal. One afternoon, a local journalist who volunteered at the community center asked if she could interview me for their newsletter. I hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. She came over with her little recorder, sat at my kitchen table, and asked me about everything: the trip, the estrangement, the transformation. At the end of the interview, she said, "Mr. Carter, I think your story could inspire a lot of people beyond this center. Would you allow me to share it more widely? Maybe publish it online?" I thought about it for a moment. I knew Denise might see it. Marcus too. But for the first time, that didn't scare me. I wasn't ashamed anymore. "Do it," I said. "If it helps someone, it's worth it." A week later, the article was published on a local news site under the headline, "The Day I Tore the Tickets. One Man's Stand Against Family Neglect." I didn't think much of it until my phone started ringing. At first, it was people from the neighborhood, old friends, folks from church, even strangers who'd read the piece and wanted to thank me. Then the story spread further. A small TV station reached out, then a podcast, then a national paper picked it up. Suddenly, my quiet little life was thrust into the light. The comments poured in from people all over the country: sons, daughters, parents, grandparents. Some angry, some supportive, but most filled with understanding. Thousands of people shared their own versions of the same story, of being taken for granted, dismissed, forgotten. I became, somehow, a reluctant symbol of a silent generation finding its voice. Denise called 2 days after the story went viral. Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with fury. "Dad, how could you do this? You embarrassed the family. Everyone's talking about it. My coworkers saw it. Marcus's partner saw it. Our names are being dragged through the mud." "I never used your full names," I said calmly. "And if you're embarrassed, maybe you should ask yourself why." "You're twisting everything," she shouted. "You make it sound like we're monsters." "I didn't make you anything," I said quietly. "I just told the truth." There was a long silence on the other end, and then she said, "You've destroyed this family." I closed my eyes, took a breath, and replied, "No, Denise. This family destroyed itself a long time ago. I just stopped pretending." She hung up on me. The days that followed were strange. I started receiving letters from people, some handwritten, others emailed, thanking me, sharing their own stories of courage and heartbreak. A woman from Ohio wrote that she'd finally moved out of her son's basement after reading my article. A man from Arizona said he'd stopped giving his daughter money for her gambling habit. Each letter reminded me that pain, when shared honestly, could turn into something powerful. Then one evening, a knock came at my door. It was Maya. She stood there awkwardly, holding a small paper bag. She looked older than I remembered, maybe because the carefree arrogance I'd seen before was gone. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, glancing around the apartment as if seeing it for the first time. Duke meowed at her from his perch, and she smiled faintly. "I brought you something," she said, handing me the bag. Inside was a slice of pecan pie from my favorite bakery, the one I used to take her to when she was little. "Thank you," I said quietly. We sat down at the table, the silence between us thick, but not hostile. "I read your story," she said after a while. "Mom was furious. Dad too. But, I don't know. When I read it, I cried. Because I realized you were right. We treated you like you didn't matter. I'm sorry, Grandpa." The words hit me like a wave. I hadn't expected an apology. Not from her, not from anyone. "It's not too late, Maya," I said gently. "You can always choose to do better." She nodded, eyes shining with tears. "I want to." That night, after she left, I sat by the window again with Duke purring at my feet. I realized that maybe, just maybe, something good could still grow from all this pain. Sometimes, the only way to wake people up is by burning down the illusion they're living in. And if that fire had to start with me, then so be it. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to live, and I wasn't afraid to be seen. The morning after Maya's visit, I woke up with a strange mix of emotions: relief, sorrow, hope, and something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. I'd finally stood up for myself, told my story, and somehow, against all odds, my granddaughter had found her way back to me. It didn't erase the years of pain, but it was a beginning, a small light in a tunnel that had felt endless. That day, I went for a walk along the river. The trees were beginning to turn, the first touches of autumn painting gold into the green. I watched the water shimmer under the sunlight and thought about how life has a way of circling back, offering second chances when you least expect them. Later that afternoon, Maya called. "Grandpa," she said, "can I come by again this weekend? Maybe you could show me some of your paintings." "Of course," I said, smiling. "I'd like that." After we hung up, I sat for a while, thinking about how different her tone had been. No rush, no indifference, no teenage sarcasm, just warmth. It reminded me of the little girl who used to fall asleep in my arms while I read her bedtime stories. Maybe that little girl wasn't gone after all, just buried under the noise of her parents' world. Friday came, and Maya showed up carrying 2 bags, one with her clothes and another with groceries. "I wanted to make dinner for you," she said shyly. "Something special." She made chicken Alfredo, following a recipe on her phone, and though the sauce came out too thick and the noodles were a bit overcooked, it was one of the best meals I'd had in years. We talked for hours that night. She told me about school, her friends, her plans to study psychology. She said she'd been thinking a lot since reading my story about empathy, about the way we treat the people who love us most. "Mom doesn't like that I came here," she admitted quietly. "She said you've been manipulated by strangers who want attention. She says you're confused." I chuckled softly. "I'm not confused, Maya. I just finally see things clearly." "I know," she said. "I believe you." We spent the rest of the evening looking through old photo albums. She saw pictures of her grandmother, of me holding Denise as a baby, of family barbecues from years ago. At one point, she touched one of the pictures, a young Denise smiling with her arms around me, and whispered, "What happened to her?" I didn't answer. Maybe because I didn't know. Maybe because I didn't want to say aloud what I feared most. That greed, pride, and the hunger for control had hollowed something out of her that love could no longer fill. That night, after Maya went to sleep on the couch, I sat alone in the dim light, watching Duke chase shadows on the floor. I realized that even though my story had spread far and wide, it wasn't about fame or pity anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and showing that it's never too late to choose yourself. The next morning, we went to the farmer's market together. People recognized me from the article. A few came up to shake my hand, thanking me for speaking up. Maya looked surprised but proud. She saw how strangers treated me, not as a burden, not as a relic, but as a man who had something valuable to say. When we got home, she said, "Grandpa, I want to help you share your story more. Maybe make a video or something. People would listen to you." I laughed. "A video? Me? I don't even know how to use half the buttons on my phone." She grinned. "Then I'll help you." So we did. Over the next week, Maya came over every other day. We filmed short clips of me talking about my story, about aging with dignity, about setting boundaries and rebuilding self-worth. We called it Voices of the Forgotten. Maya edited the clips, added subtitles, and posted them online. Within days, they spread like wildfire. People from all over the country, and even other countries, started sending messages. Seniors thanked me for giving them courage. Younger people thanked me for making them see their parents differently. Even caregivers wrote in, saying they'd never realized how invisible some of their patients felt. It was overwhelming, humbling, beautiful. Then, one afternoon, as I was painting by the window, I got a knock on my door. It was Denise. She looked different. Not in her clothes or her hair. Those were immaculate as always, but in her face, there were dark circles under her eyes, and for the first time in years, she looked unsure of herself. "Dad," she said quietly, "can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." She stepped inside, glancing around the apartment like it was foreign territory. Her eyes landed on the plants, the cat, the paintings. "It looks nice," she said softly. "Thank you." We stood in silence for a moment before she finally spoke. "I read your story. All of it. I saw the videos too." She swallowed hard. "You made me look like a terrible person." "I didn't make you look like anything," I said. "I just told the truth." She looked down. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. When Mom died, I guess I got scared. Scared of losing control, of losing you. I thought if I could keep everything orderly, nothing would fall apart. I didn't realize I was pushing you away." It was strange hearing her speak like that, without anger, without superiority. Just a daughter, stripped of pretense. I sighed. "Denise, all I ever wanted was respect. Not obedience, not gratitude. Just respect." She nodded, tears welling up. "I know. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I want to try." I studied her for a long moment. Part of me wanted to embrace her right then, to erase all the hurt. But another part, the wiser part, knew that healing takes time. "Trying is a good start," I said finally. She stayed for an hour. We didn't talk about the past too much. Instead, we talked about small things, the weather, my cat, her work. Before she left, she paused at the door. "Dad," she said, "thank you for not shutting me out completely." "Denise," I said gently, "the door's always been open. You just had to knock for the right reasons." When she left, I sat for a long time in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not completely, but it was something close. Maybe the first fragile bridge across years of distance. The following week, things began to shift in ways I couldn't have predicted. The local news did a follow-up story about the videos Maya and I had made. They invited both of us to speak at a senior empowerment conference in Atlanta. When they asked, I nearly refused. I wasn't used to big crowds, but Maya squeezed my hand and said, "Grandpa, you have to do it. This is bigger than us now." So I went. The conference hall was packed. Hundreds of people, many my age, others much younger. When it was my turn to speak, I walked onto the stage, heart pounding, palms sweaty. The lights were bright, the cameras intimidating. But when I looked out at that sea of faces, all I saw were people who needed to hear what I'd learned. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Walter Carter. I'm 68 years old. For most of my life, I thought love meant saying yes. I thought that if I kept giving, people would never leave. But sometimes, when you give too much, you disappear. And when you disappear, the people around you forget you were ever there. I tore those tickets not because I was angry, but because I finally remembered I existed." The hall went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then came the applause, slow at first, then rising, wave after wave. Maya stood in the front row, clapping, tears streaming down her face. That night, when we drove home, she said quietly, "Grandpa, I'm proud of you." I looked at her, smiling. "I'm proud of me too." But even then, I knew the story wasn't over, because peace has a way of attracting storms, and I could feel one brewing on the horizon. 2 days later, I received a certified letter. It was from Marcus's law firm, a petition for guardianship proceedings, claiming I was financially and mentally compromised due to public erratic behavior. My hands trembled as I held the paper. After all that had happened, Marcus was making one final move. But this time, I wasn't the same man they used to control. And I was ready. When I finished reading the petition, I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. It felt surreal, like a bad rerun of a nightmare I thought I'd already escaped. Guardianship proceedings. That was Marcus's last card, his final attempt to strip away everything I had reclaimed. I took a deep breath, folded the papers neatly, and set them on the table. Duke brushed against my leg, meowing softly, as if reminding me I wasn't alone. I'd faced worse storms than this one, and I'd already learned that fear only has power if you let it. That evening, I called Harold, my lawyer friend. "He's really going through with it," I told him, my voice steady. "I expected as much," Harold replied calmly. Men like Marcus don't know how to stop once they start losing control. But he doesn't have a case, Walter. You've got documentation, witnesses, psychological evaluations, everything we need to shut this down before it begins. He asked me to bring the letter and all related paperwork to his office the next morning. I barely slept that night, not out of fear, but from the quiet rage that settled in my chest. Rage not just at Marcus, but at the arrogance that made him think he could still own me. When morning came, I ironed my shirt, shined my shoes, and looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time in a long while, I saw a man who looked strong, confident, alive. Laverne would have been proud, I thought. At Harold's office, he scanned the documents, occasionally shaking his head. Unbelievable. They're alleging you've been manipulated by outside influences. They even mentioned your public appearances as erratic behavior. I chuckled bitterly. Apparently, finding your self-respect counts as erratic now. Harold looked up, smiling faintly. We'll handle this, Walt. But you should know, cases like these can get ugly. They'll try to drag your name through the mud. You'll need to be ready for that. I've already lived through humiliation worse than anything they can throw at me, I said. Let them try. Within a week, the legal notice arrived, setting a date for a preliminary hearing. Word spread fast, faster than I wanted. Friends from the community center called, outraged and worried. The local newspaper even caught wind of it, running a short piece titled, Elder Rights Advocate Faces Guardianship Battle with Family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd become a symbol of self-empowerment for older adults, and now my own family was trying to legally declare me incapable of independence. But I refused to be their victim again. When the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into the courthouse wearing my best suit and holding my head high. Harold was beside me, calm and composed as always. Denise was there too, sitting a few rows behind Marcus. She looked uneasy, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marcus, on the other hand, was all confidence, expensive suit, slick smile, that familiar air of superiority that made my stomach churn. The judge, an older black woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could slice steel, began the session briskly. Mr. Carter, she said, glancing over her glasses, your son-in-law is petitioning for legal guardianship over you, claiming you're no longer capable of managing your financial or personal affairs. How do you respond? I rose slowly, feeling the eyes of the courtroom on me. Your Honor, I said clearly, I'm 68 years old. I've managed my own affairs for nearly 7 decades. I'm not here because I've lost my mind. I'm here because I finally found my voice, and some people can't handle that. A quiet murmur ran through the room. The judge nodded slightly, her eyes softening just for a second. Proceed, counselor. Marcus's attorney stood, launching into a rehearsed speech about concern, family duty, and erratic behavior. He cited my viral videos, my impulsive financial decisions, and my emotional instability. I almost laughed when he described me as a vulnerable senior manipulated by online attention. When he finished, Harold stood and began his defense. He presented Dr. Hayes' psychological evaluation, notarized and dated. He handed over transcripts of Marcus's threatening voicemails. He even played one recording aloud, the one where Marcus said, "If you keep acting out, we'll have to consider other options, places that deal with people like you." The courtroom fell silent. The judge's expression turned cold as ice. "Mr. Carter," she said, addressing Marcus directly, "is this your voice?" Marcus hesitated. "It was taken out of context. Answer the question." He swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Denise lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. Harold continued, "Your Honor, my client is not a danger to himself or others. He's a man who's finally exercising his right to live freely. The only thing he's guilty of is refusing to be exploited any longer." When it was my turn to speak again, I stood and looked at the judge. "Your Honor, all I've ever done is love my family. But love without respect is a slow kind of death. I gave them everything I had, my money, my time, my health. And when I had nothing left to give, they decided I must be broken. I'm not broken. I'm free." The judge stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, This court finds no evidence that Mr. Carter is incapacitated. The petition for guardianship is hereby dismissed." A gasp went through the courtroom. Marcus's face turned crimson. Denise covered her face with her hands and began to cry quietly. The judge leaned forward. "And Mr. Carter," she added, her tone softening just a little. "If anyone ever tries something like this again, call me personally. I don't tolerate family members who mistake control for care." I nodded, a lump rising in my throat. "Thank you, Your Honor." When the hearing ended, Marcus stormed out without looking back. Denise lingered near the door, watching me. For a moment, our eyes met. I didn't see anger there anymore, just shame. Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting. Microphones, cameras, questions flying from every direction. I wasn't interested in making a spectacle of it, but I did say one thing. This isn't about me. It's about every older person who's been silenced, controlled, or dismissed. We deserve dignity, not pity. The next morning, that quote was everywhere. It became a headline, a slogan even. The story spread further than I could have imagined. Senior advocacy groups reached out. One organization, Voices of Silver, invited me to speak at their national summit. Maya was ecstatic. "Grandpa, you're becoming a movement," she said, laughing through tears. I smiled, shaking my head. "I don't want to be a movement, kiddo. I just want to live in peace." "Maybe you can do both," she said. Over the following months, life settled into something new. Denise started coming around again, not often, but sincerely. She helped me tend to my plants, sometimes bringing groceries or just sitting with me on the balcony in silence. There was guilt in her eyes, but also growth. I didn't rush her. Healing can't be forced. Marcus, thankfully, vanished from our lives. Denise filed for separation soon after the hearing. It turned out she'd finally seen the side of him I'd known for years, the manipulation, the greed, the control. Maya kept visiting every week. We'd paint together, record videos, or take Duke for walks in the park. Sometimes she'd bring classmates who wanted to meet the man who tore the tickets. I always laughed at that. I didn't mean to start a revolution, I'd tell them. I just wanted to remind people that their worth doesn't expire. By the end of the year, Voices of the Forgotten had turned into something bigger, a nonprofit organization helping older adults reclaim their independence and tell their stories. Maya managed the online side, and I handled community events. We hosted storytelling nights, workshops on financial literacy, even art exhibits for seniors rediscovering their creativity. One evening, as we prepared for our first anniversary celebration, I looked around the room, at the smiling faces, the laughter, the light, and felt something deep in my chest loosen for good. I had lost a lot over the years, my wife, my illusions, my old sense of belonging, but what I'd gained was priceless: peace, purpose, and the quiet joy of knowing I was no longer invisible. Later that night, sitting on my balcony with Duke purring in my lap, I whispered a small prayer of thanks for the pain that woke me up, for the strength that carried me, for the family I was rebuilding, not the one I was born into, but the one I chose. The city lights shimmered like stars scattered across the earth, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt completely at home. Still, as the wind rustled the leaves, I couldn't help but think, this story wasn't quite finished yet. There was one more conversation I needed to have, one final chapter waiting to be written. And this time, I'd be the one to decide how it ended. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I decided it was time. The last conversation, the one I'd been postponing not out of fear, but because I needed to be ready, truly ready. I had faced courts, shame, and public scrutiny. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece, like an old house restored with patience and love. But one door was still left unopened, the one between me and Denise. I called her that morning. She answered after a few rings, her voice cautious. "Dad." "Morning, Denise," I said gently. "Are you busy?" "No, not really." A pause. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "I just thought maybe we could talk." "Really talk?" She hesitated. "You mean about everything?" "About everything," I confirmed. She took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll come by." When she arrived that afternoon, she looked tired but calmer than I'd seen her in years. She wasn't dressed in her usual elegant armor. No designer clothes, no sharp heels. Just jeans, a sweater, and a face that looked like it had finally stopped pretending. I made tea, the way Laverne used to, with lemon and a little honey. We sat at the table where so much of the story had unfolded. Duke jumped onto a chair and curled up quietly, as if he understood this was sacred ground. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't hostile anymore. It was fragile, but peaceful, like the air after a long storm. "I've been seeing a therapist," Denise said finally, eyes fixed on her cup. "She said I should try to understand where my anger came from. She said control is just fear in disguise." I nodded. "That's true. I was so scared of losing everything," she said, her voice trembling. "When Mom died, I felt like the ground vanished under my feet. You were all I had left, but you reminded me of her, of the pain, of everything I couldn't control. So instead of leaning on you, I pushed you away. I told myself you were weak, that you needed me to make decisions for you. But the truth is, I needed to believe that, because if you didn't need me, then I'd be alone." Her words came out like confession, raw and shaky. I let them sit in the air for a while before I spoke. "I understand, Denise, but you have to know that love can't survive when it's built on control. You were never alone. You just didn't trust that love could exist without ownership." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was cruel, Dad. I said things no daughter should ever say. I humiliated you. I don't know how you can even look at me." I reached across the table, my hand covering hers. Her fingers were cold, trembling. "Because you're my daughter," I said softly. "And forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing peace over pain." She broke down crying then, and for the first time in decades, I saw her not as the successful businesswoman or the distant adult, but as my little girl again, the one who used to climb into my lap and fall asleep while I hummed old blues songs. I held her hand until the tears stopped. When she looked up, she said, "I read every letter people wrote you, the ones you showed Maya. I realized how many people lived the same story we did. You didn't just save yourself, Dad. You helped a lot of others too." "I didn't mean to," I said with a small smile. "I just got tired of disappearing." She smiled weakly. "Maya told me about Voices of the Forgotten. I want to help, if you'll let me. Maybe I could handle the accounting or the fundraising." I studied her face for a moment. There was sincerity there, and humility. The arrogance, the entitlement, they were gone. Life had softened her edges, the way rivers carve stone. "I'd like that," I said, "but only if you're doing it for the right reasons." She nodded. "I am. I promise." For the rest of the afternoon, we talked, not just about the past, but about the future, about Maya's college plans, about the programs we wanted to build for the organization, about how to create spaces where elders could feel seen and heard. There was laughter, too, tentative at first, then easier real. Before she left, Denise walked to the window and looked out at the sunset. "I used to think your apartment was so small," she said, "but it's beautiful, peaceful." "It's enough," I said. "That's all any of us really need." She turned to me and smiled through tears. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Denise." When she left, I stood at the door for a long time, watching her walk down the street. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of resentment between us. Just a quiet understanding that sometimes love doesn't heal everything. It just learns how to coexist with the scars. That night, I sat on the balcony with Duke in my lap, thinking about how far we'd come. The world outside felt still, like it was holding its breath. The city lights shimmered across the skyline, and somewhere far below, I could hear the faint hum of life moving forward. Over the following months, Voices of the Forgotten grew faster than any of us expected. Maya took charge of the media side, turning our message into a movement. Denise organized fundraising galas, reaching out to companies and civic groups. Seniors began to write in from all over the country, sharing their stories of resilience, of reclaiming their dignity. We even opened our first community center, a small but bright space with paintings on the walls, bookshelves lined with memoirs, and a big sign over the entrance that read, "You Still Matter." The opening day was magical. People from all walks of life came, nurses, teachers, grandparents, even young students who wanted to volunteer. I gave a short speech, nothing fancy. I just told the truth, like I always had. I used to believe my life was over, I said. But it wasn't. It was just waiting for me to wake up. Sometimes the worst heartbreak isn't losing someone, it's losing yourself. But if you're still breathing, it's never too late to come home. Applause filled the room, but what touched me most was seeing Denise and Maya standing side by side, smiling through tears. As the months passed, our little organization became a beacon for people who'd been silenced too long. Newspapers called me a symbol of late-life renewal. Others called me an activist, but I didn't feel like either. I was just a man who got tired of being invisible and decided to live before dying. One evening, near the end of the year, Maya and I were walking home from the center. The air was crisp, the streets glowing with winter lights. She looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, do you ever wish things had been different? That none of this had happened?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said finally, "because if it hadn't happened, I'd still be asleep. I'd still be waiting for other people to give me permission to live. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to see what really matters." She smiled. "You're kind of famous now, you know." I laughed. "Then I hope I'm the kind of famous that helps people, not the kind that fades." When we reached my building, she hugged me tightly. "Good night, Grandpa. I love you." "I love you too, kiddo." I went upstairs, fed Duke, and sat at my desk. The night was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. I opened my journal, the same one where I'd written the day I tore the tickets, and began to write again. This time, the words came easier. They weren't about pain or loss anymore. They were about peace, about rebirth, about finding worth not in being needed, but in simply being. As I wrote the final line, I felt something deep and certain settle in my chest. I tore the tickets to end a journey that was never mine. But in doing so, I found the courage to start the one that truly was. I closed the journal, looked out the window at the sleeping city, and smiled. Somewhere out there, people were reading stories like mine and realizing they weren't alone. Somewhere, another old man or woman was standing up, saying no for the first time. And that, I thought, was enough. The chapter wasn't about revenge or regret anymore. It was about redemption, about a life reclaimed, love rediscovered, and a legacy of courage left behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt complete. Not perfect, not unscarred, just whole. And as the dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky with soft gold, I whispered into the quiet morning, "Thank you for everything."